One night, after another binge, I ended up in a hospital. And I was laying on a hospital bed, and I asked God, like, just take me. I just wanted to die. I mean, if you're not gonna, it's not gonna help me, let me go.
I became an alcoholic. I played the victim card when I was young. I was raped. I lived on the streets with my little sister. And I thought God had just left me, because why did all those things happen if God was real?
Daily drinking led to isolation, continued bad decisions, encounters with the law, and just the isolation that I felt and the guilt and shame over really the harm that I was doing to myself, but more to the people around me, the people that cared for me, was so overwhelming.
I was in rehab by the time I was 16 and a felon by the time I was 18. I was just kind of numb to anything and everyone that was around me. I hurt the people that I loved the most, especially myself.
I started working these 12 steps. And that relationship I had with God through these steps, it seemed like it was getting better.
So when I worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, it taught me how to ask God every day when I woke up to keep me sober for today, to also let me look at my own character defects and to be a better person today than I was yesterday.
What I experienced in my first recovery meeting, AA meeting, was complete acceptance by a group of total strangers that didn't know me. Their grace shown to me actually created now this willingness, this desire to be open to this new path.
I feel like I experienced God in the very first step because I had to admit to myself that I was powerless over drugs and powerless over my addiction, and I had to give that power to somebody greater than myself. And at the point and where I was at, any power was greater than my power, and I knew that I had to turn to somebody and something.
Right now I am 5 years sober. I just celebrated 5 years last month on the 20th. I'm married now, and it's been a blessing, man. It's unbelievable.
I'm married today. My children are no longer embarrassed by me. My entire family welcomes me in their home today and actually trusts me. There's always hope that life will fall into place. People will forgive you. Somebody will be willing to help you, and everything you've lost, you can eventually earn back. As long as you get out of the way and let God lead the path and not you lead your own path, God's will be done. I
have been following the steps and applying them for 39 years, only by the grace of God and His intervention in my life.
There's a cliche saying in the rooms where it says that God brought me through the 12 steps, and the 12 steps brought me back to God. And because of God and the 12 steps, I've been able to experience life for the first time.
Well, thank you everybody for being here, coming out, doing our evening on understanding addiction. And I'll confess, I'm really nervous right now. My heart was like racing. Because we've never done anything like this. We've never had an event like this. And so anytime we do something new, I just kind of wig out. Is it going to be a flop? Is anybody going to come out? Is everybody going to come out? And I was just nervous because, to be honest, I don't know how this is going to go, and I don't know what God is going to kind of use through this evening. But what I do know is that is huge for God's heart, seeing people trapped in addiction, trapped in sin, experience freedom from that. So I don't know exactly how God is going to use this evening, but I know I love that. That is our heart at Redemption Chapel, because I know that's God's heart. And so, man, we want to try anything and everything to being a part of seeing more stories where people experience freedom from addiction. So a big part of this night is understanding addiction, and we've kind of pushed it out to our church. So whether man, that term, whether you embrace that as an addict or not, we hope this kind of is helpful to everybody. So if that is you, if you kind of embrace that label, that moniker that, yes, I have an addiction to substance, man, coming out of this, I mean, our hope is if that is you and you feel better understood and there is more compassion for you, that you feel welcome in this place, then to me, it is an absolute success, because that is our heart. We want people that wrestle with addiction, because in some ways that's all of us, substance or not, addicted to sin. And so we want everybody, regardless how messy you feel, to be welcome in this place. And so we want to increase our understanding, increase compassion. And, you know, maybe you don't kind of resonate as an addict, and this helps us better have compassion and care for those wrestling with that. So I'm grateful for this evening, grateful for you coming out, and grateful for Dr. Blankenship, who's going to be presenting. So kind of a big bulk of our time, Dr. Blankenship is going to be presenting a lot of what he has gleaned and learned and has some expertise in this area to help us increase in understanding. So I'm excited and grateful for him and all his work to be able to present. Then we'll also have a panel as well. So as he's presenting, you will see there is a lot of info. So don't feel like you need to be jotting all of that down. All of his slides are going to be available at the welcome kiosk whenever you leave. So don't feel like you need to memorize every slide, every stat. So those will be made available, every one of the slides, out at the kiosk. And so he's going to present, and then we'll put a number up there and have a Q&A. So any questions you have. So Dr. Blankenship will be up here, and also some people that are in our recovery ministry, and any question that you have. Again, our hope is to just increase understanding and increase compassion. So that is kind of why we're here, and I trust God's going to use it. And part of that is when I get anxious, I pray a lot more. So I've had a lot of prayer for this time, and I want to keep that rolling. So I'm going to pray, and immediately after that, Dr. Blankenship, if you can just kind of make your way up here, and kind of the stage will be yours. So if you would bow your head, I would love to pray. Father, I don't know what you're going to do. I know our heart is your heart in helping people experience freedom. Father, I don't know what that looks like, but would each of us, God, take a step in that direction of greater compassion, or experience even greater freedom in our own wrestles with sin and with substance abuse. And so, Father, God, we give you this evening, we give you this time. God, would you be glorified in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, well, I heard from Dr. Blankenship, he has invested a ton in this evening, so if you would kind of just give him a round of applause and welcome him and thank him.
Thanks, Christian. So I was more excited than nervous until Pastor Jared comes up and says how nervous he was. And so I don't know if you're nervous or not, but so let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am Dr. Dave Blankenship. I've been a counselor for 18 years. I currently am the interim director of clinical services at Emerge Counseling Ministries in Akron. I also oversee the clinical services at Restore Addiction Recovery, which is in Akron. And so Pastor Jared called me up and said that, asked me if I would come do this, and I've got some pretty interesting things maybe that you've never heard before that I'm hoping will help open some eyes. And so we'll see. So the point of today is not so much treatment. We're going to talk about understanding addiction. And so at the end, we'll have questions and answers. So be thinking about some things that you want to ask. So we're going to go over some stats on addiction, types of drugs, addiction terms, and then we're going to talk about the neuroscience of addiction, of how addiction actually works physiologically, what the Bible says about addiction, and then I'm going to present a challenge to you. So let's start off with some statistics. 19.4% of people have used illicit drugs. When I say illicit drugs, that means illegal drugs or misused prescribed drugs at least once in their lifetime. 700,000 deaths in the United States since 2000, and it's going up 30% year after year. It is significantly increasing every year. That's a pretty substantial increase. 72% of deaths are synthetic opioids overdose, especially here in Ohio. Specifically, 136 Americans dying daily from opioids, which is pretty significant. So when I say synthetic opioids like Oxycontin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, methadone, fentanyl, tramadol, those types, and we'll go over these here in a little bit. 22% of males, 17% of females use illegal drugs or misuse prescriptions the past year, and men die at a rate that's twice than females. And so not only is this an epidemic that is increasing, but especially for men, it is claiming a lot of lives. All right, good, you can see that. So we're going to talk about the types of drugs. Going to go over it briefly. Not going to spend a lot of time, because I really want to spend a lot of time on how addiction works. So you've got your depressants and your sedatives. So how this acts on the central nervous system is it slows things down, right? So alcohol, benzodiazepines, your sleep medications. So coming home from a long day at work, and what do a lot of people do? They'll take a glass of wine. Why is that? Because they're nervous and anxious, and so that depressant kind of depresses the central nervous system. And then you've got your stimulants, caffeine. Anybody had their coffee today? Yeah, I want to pick on you a little bit. All right, so coffee is a stimulant. Nicotine is a stimulant. Your ADHD meds, amphetamines is what they're called, are a stimulant, and also weight loss products. Those are amphetamines. Helps increase heart rate. Cocaine, meth, crystal meth, methamphetamines. Those are all stimulants. Increases the central nervous system, makes things work faster. Then you have your opiates and your opioids. A lot of times they're used interchangeably, but the opioids are more of your natural type medications, and opiates natural, and opioids are the synthetic. And then they have the natural, the synthetic, and the semi-synthetic. And so your codeine, morphine is more of your natural opiates, and then the synthetic, Demerol, fentanyl, methadone, and then your semi-synthetic like heroin and some of the other ones. So some of these might look familiar to you. Remember, this class of drugs right here are the ones that are extremely high in claiming a lot of lives, unfortunately, and especially in Ohio, it is just increasing significantly. All right, you've got cannabis, marijuana. Now, this is an interesting drug because it's a depressant, a stimulant, and it's a hallucinogen, which is weird. So it speeds things up, it slows things down, and so it's just a different drug. It just affects people differently. You probably heard a lot about CBD oil, right? CBD oil doesn't have the THC in it, which means the THC is what causes the high in a lot of folks, and so it doesn't have the THC in it, is what CBD oil is. Again, not going to spend a lot of time on these, just kind of put things in perspective so we can get to the significant parts. Inhalants, spray paints, gasoline, cleaning fluids. You remember back in the day when you could go and buy spray paint, you didn't have to show your ID? You remember doing that? And now when you go, you're going to get spray paint, or I think I bought something for my truck. It was a cleaner for my truck that you would put in the fuel. I had to show my ID to prove that I'm 18 years old. Yep, you ever run into that, right? Yeah, they didn't used to do that. Even certain cold and cough medicines over the counter you could buy back in the day without showing your ID, but now you got to show your ID to purchase these. I remember I used to work at juvenile probation. I was a counselor at juvenile probation. I was a liaison between the mental health agency and then also juveniles on probation. And this was in Alabama, so Ohio's the third state I've been licensed in. And they had, the teenagers were getting high on what they called triple C's, cold, cough, congestion, triple C's. And so then now you have to maybe show your ID for that. All right, and then you got your hallucinogens, so the classic hallucinogens and your dissociative hallucinogens. I'm just putting them up there just for your reference. We're not going to spend a lot of time on drug types because I want to get into understanding addiction. So hopefully those will be a good reference for folks. All right, so to define some things, there is abuse and there's dependence. When it comes to substance use disorders, it's either abuse or it's dependence. What's the difference? Abuse is when you use a substance that there are negative consequences. So you go out to your favorite restaurant, you have a few drinks, you drive home, you're kind of swerved a little bit, cop pulls you over, you get a citation for that. That would be an example of a negative consequence, so that would be an abuse. Dependence is different. It's where that you have this need that you need to have it. It can be reoccurring, it can come and go, or it can be more ongoing. And then there's different types of dependence. There's psychological and physical dependence. So psychological dependence, you need to use it to think, feel, or function normally. I remember talking to a client where the only time she would ever smoke is when she was driving long distances. That's the only time that she would smoke. And she would do that because she needed to have some sort of physical movement in order for her to drive without falling asleep. So by doing that a lot of times over and over, she created a psychological dependence on nicotine for her. And so that would be an example of psychological dependence. Or anytime I'm with my friends and I have a good time, then we drink. And so in order for me to have a good time, then I drink, and I feel compelled to drink because of this physical or this psychological dependence. And then there's the physical dependence. So tissues of the body that require the presence of alcohol and other drugs to function normally. I remember going into a nursing home. I used to do counseling going into a nursing home, and the physician would write a prescription for a certain amount of alcohol that the resident would drink, because without it, he would literally go into shock, and his body would go into shock, and he would have seizures because he had this physical dependence on alcohol. And so the doctor wrote a prescription, said 1 to 2 drinks, or 1 drink a day, I think, and this was in a nursing home. And so that would be an example of physical dependence. All right, so then there's intoxication. Thinking, feeling, behavior are affected as a result of that influence. And so go out to your favorite, I know I keep talking about alcohol, go out to your favorite restaurant, Mexican restaurant, and you order a margarita, and then they put a little too much tequila in there, and then you're drinking it on an empty stomach, and then all of a sudden you notice that you're kind of being affected by that. That would be intoxication. And then withdrawal and tolerance comes with dependence, not with abuse. So that's how you differentiate between abuse and dependence. So for example, you coffee drinkers out there, what happens when you go a day without drinking coffee? Do you ever have headaches? What is that called? That's called withdrawal. That is a form of dependence. Isn't that interesting? Or stomach aches would be another one. And so withdrawals is that you have this physical or psychological effects occurring when you discontinue that. And then there's tolerance, increased quantities of alcohol and other drugs to achieve the same effect. So anytime there's tolerance or there's withdrawal, it's not abuse, it is dependence. So putting things in perspective. All right. Now, what causes addiction? Well, it depends on who you ask. There's different theories to this. I'm going to tell you what I think causes addiction in my experience. So there's the medical model or the disease model. And so saying that addiction is the disease of the brain. It's a chemical imbalance that once you have it, you'll have it for life, and you are expected to be in treatment of some sort for the rest of your life. So that would be the medical model, disease model. There's the genetic model, which is similar, where you are genetically predisposed to have a certain inclination towards a certain drug or alcohol. And so if it runs in your family, then you have that genetic predisposition, or you're more inclined to have this addiction to certain substances. There's the exposure model, which is biological conditioning. And so product of learning. So when I grow up and all my family was drinking, then I learned that that's what you do. And so then it got reinforced. And so then that's a way that I developed this type of addiction. All right, social cultural models. So every time you watch commercials, there's commercials showing certain things. Again, I'm picking on alcohol. And so by that, then you learn that, hey, that's what I want to do. And so we're culturally stimulated to do that, or certain cultural roles. There's the psychological model. So using it because I'm self-medicating, because of certain trauma maybe that I've been through in my life, and so I'm coping with something. And so that would be a psychological model. And then there's the moral model. It's a personal choice. You're using poor self-regulation skills, weak morals, and then my favorite there, the devil made me do it. I remember I used to live in Alabama, and on one of the highways there was a huge billboard that said, "Go to church or the devil will get you." And so does that mean if you go to church the devil won't get you? I don't know. All right. Now, all right, so which one is it? Which model is it? So you ask, is it biological? Is it psychological? Is it spiritual? Which one is it? And the answer is yes. It's how much of it is biological, how much of it is psychological, how much of it is sociological, how much of it is spiritual, because they all play a role. And so I believe that it comes from more of a biopsychosocial model. So biologically, when you look at identical twins, studies that if the one twin had a genetic predisposition, then the other one should also. And so to look at the rates of alcoholism with what's called monozygotic twins, which is the identical twins, 47 to 59% of those twins will have rates of alcoholism compared to those who are the dizygotic twins. So those are twins coming from two different eggs, but they're still considered twins. They don't have the same genetic material. And so for them, there's a 31 to 36% of those having addiction to alcohol. So that genetic predisposition makes alcohol and other drugs more reinforcing than others not having that genetic bend. And then the addiction activates the same neural circuitry involved in normal responses to natural rewards, such as food and procreation. Now, procreation is a nice way in the church to say sex. I said it in church. All right? So we're going to talk more about this because it's going to make a lot of sense. So that's biological. Then the psychological, past trauma. Past trauma may result in substance use being a coping strategy. So a lot of clients I've worked with, I want to say 90% of them have trauma in their background. It's probably more than that, if you can imagine that. 90% have trauma in their background. We even, before we started, we listened to some testimonies and there was some reference to trauma. And so then if I experienced a trauma and I'm growing up and then there's certain things that help me cope, maybe that would be certain alcohol and other drugs that help me cope. Now this next one is really significant. Encoding experiences of memories are powerful. Out of all of the senses, smell has the most significance on memory. Which may seem surprising. Have you ever been out and about somewhere and all of a sudden you got a smell of either food or someone's perfume or cologne, and all of a sudden instantly you had a memory that just popped up? And so I remember I went to New York one time and they had, I think it was boiled peanuts. Boiled peanuts. I don't know why that stuck out to me. And so anytime I smell boiled peanuts, my mind goes to New York. So whenever memories are coded, then they go into the emotional part of our brain, which is where the unconscious is. And so anytime that someone has some significant experience, whether that's a trauma or a certain drug experience, then it's coded in their mind, which then goes into long-term memory. And so anything that reminds them of that unconsciously is going to instantly bring back that experience. So that's how psychologically memories can be coded. Even after many years of abstinence, exposure to one drink or drug can ignite a behavior and attitude that is essential for them to acquire more drink or drugs. So that's why when someone goes for many, many years without any drug or alcohol use, and I'm talking like 20-something years, and then all of a sudden, and this is the number one thing that leads to relapse, is I've been doing pretty well for a long period of time. I think I'm good. I can probably have one drink because it's been 5, 10, 15 years. I should be good. And then immediately it accesses that memory coding and they can go right back into it. So that's why that happens. Certain personality traits can lead to greater likelihood of addiction. Impulsivity, sensation seeking, those type of personality traits. Sometimes being very agreeable, too agreeable, or sometimes when it comes to rules. For some people, rules are just, these are the rules and we start at this time and this is what you're supposed to do. And other people, rules are relative, and so that can play a role also. And then there's social, deviant peer affiliation and low parental monitoring in adolescence, as well as accessibility to alcohol and drugs throughout the lifespan. So when I was working with adolescents on probation, the number one reason why they got involved in drugs is because there was no one there to monitor them. And so mom and dad, or single mom or dad, is working, and then my 13-year-old is home by themselves, and so therefore they go out in the neighborhood, and there's no monitoring, and then they get exposed to things. And so that can play a significant role. So bio, psycho, social. We're going to go into more details on this. All right, so let's talk about the brain and how physiologically addiction works. All right, I'm going to stand up for this one. All right, so neurotransmitters are chemical messengers. They are involved with every emotion, thought, learning, and memory. For example, what was the weather like yesterday? How do you know? Because I was there, right? Yeah. And so when I asked you that question, I bet a picture probably popped up in your mind and you went back and thought, what was the weather yesterday? Oh, okay, it was maybe raining. And so there were neurotransmitters that were firing that let you know what that was. Do you remember the first time that you felt this in love feeling or ever feeling in love? So accessing the memory and then boom, neurotransmitters, all right? That's how they work. So there's a specific one called dopamine. It's the feel-good chemical. So anytime that you do something that is pleasurable, that feels good, it could be anything, watching TV, hanging out with a friend, eating lasagna, it could be anything. And so anytime you do that, dopamine gets fired and then it's the feel-good chemical. So dopamine is what boosts mood, motivation, and attention, and it teaches us to repeat things. So if you do something that boosts your mood, dopamine gets fired and it teaches you, I want to do that again. Anytime that you have low motivation and something motivates you, dopamine fires and then it teaches you, I want to do that again. Anytime that you have difficulty with attention or something increases your attention, dopamine, and then it teaches you to do it again. So dopamine not only contributes to the experience of pleasure, but it also plays a role with learning and memory. So what that does is it reinforces things. So anytime I do something, so let's say you're feeling down and sad, and then you drink alcohol. Is that going to bring you up or take you down? It's going to take you down, right? Because it's a depressant. And so then if I'm feeling depressed and I drink alcohol, and then I feel even more depressed, and so therefore things can get a little more interesting. If I'm feeling anxious and nervous, and then I drink a glass of wine, and then that's going to get reinforced. It teaches me that I'm going to continue to do that. And so reinforcing and learning and memory. The two key elements in the transition from liking something to becoming addicted to it has to do with dopamine and how it reinforces learning and memory. All right? So all drugs are chemicals. And what they do is that they activate the neurons, which is in our brain, and it mimics natural transmitters. So what it does is it activates the reward center by flooding dopamine, which is the feel-good drug, and then it creates this euphoric feeling. And so if I take meth, and so then it's going to speed things up. And so it floods my brain with all of this dopamine, which is going to make me feel good. And it's going to make me feel like there's this high type feeling. And then also during that time, it's going to reduce the reabsorption of dopamine, meaning that it stays in the brain longer. And so therefore then it's going to make the effect last even longer. And so what this does is that those drugs target the reward center and it floods the brain with the neurotransmitter dopamine, and therefore it teaches that person to do it over and over again. And so that's why when someone takes any type of drugs or alcohol and they do it over and over and over, it eventually gets to the point where it's no longer a choice for them. It's not as simple as just choosing not to, because it activates the reward center, dopamine gets activated, feel-good drug teaches us we want to do that again. And so then it reinforced, it codes in certain memories that feels good. And so anytime I think about that drug, or I smell the drug, or I taste it or anything, the way it's encoded is going to be such a powerful thing that it's not as simple as just don't choose to do it. And so this is the pathway to addiction. Just think of sugar. Have you ever tried to go without sugar for a long period of time? Yeah? And how was that? Probably tough. Sugar is very addictive, but it seems like in our society there's certain drugs that are more, or more chemicals that are more highly acceptable, like sugar. Addiction to sugar, addiction to caffeine, coffee, right? It could be addiction to your phone. Or yep, got some reactions on that one. Yep. TV, I mean, it could be anything. All right. So these drugs, they become more addictive than natural rewards. So anytime that you eat lasagna that tastes so good, it's going to release dopamine. That's a natural reward. But if I'm taking something that releases even more dopamine, then it's going to be even highly more addictive or highly more rewarding for me. So natural rewards, they result in natural reaction to the brain, but these drugs, they can release 2 to 10 times more dopamine than natural rewards and have a more lasting effect. So that's why it comes to certain alcohol and drugs, it's extremely difficult after the mind's coded it and after it's been reinforced and it's happened over and over and over, flooding 2 to 10 times higher than natural rewards. That's why it results in it's difficult to stop. So hopefully this is making sense. Repeated use makes the body become reliant on it, and then users experience the urge to use the drug of abuse at a very biological drive, like extreme hunger or thirst. And so, can you go without food and water? No. Have you ever been extremely hungry or thirsty and you found yourself doing impulsive things? Just the other day, I was extremely hungry. I'm not starving. We use words like starving, but I was starving, and I went for the junk food. Specifically the Thin Mints of the Girl Scout cookies. Man, even though I know I should probably eat something that's good for me, I will go for junk food. It's like an impulse because I'm so hungry. And so imagine that these drugs are taken, dopamine at a 2 to 10 times higher rate, and it starts to hijack the brain, it starts to get coded, and it makes your brain think that these drugs, alcohol, is the same as food and water. And so that's why trying to tell someone, just choose not to. Just stop doing it. You should be strong enough. It's not that simple because of this whole process of dopamine, encoding memories, reinforced. It's 2 to 10 times higher, and it's a lot more than just natural rewards. All right, so you have 2 guys. This is Joe and this is Bo. Joe is on the left, Bo is on the right. He's got the red shirt. These guys went to college together, and they were roommates, 18 years old, and so they went through undergrad together. And they went everywhere together, never drank before ever. And so they started to go to parties, and they both drank the same amount, the same thing at the same time. And they did this for years and years and years. Then they graduate college, and then a few years go by, 2 to 4 years, and they come back and they're reunited. Joe, who's on the left, he doesn't have a drink and he doesn't want to drink at all because they go out to eat. Bo, however, has now developed an addiction to alcohol. What's the difference? They both have the same amount at the same time, the same thing, exactly the same. Why is one of them having an addiction to alcohol but the other one is not? And so the question is, or the answer is because it's biopsychosocial. Bo, because of his genetics, he has a genetic predisposition to be more inclined towards alcohol. All right, and then psychologically, Bo was actually experienced a trauma in his life, and so because of that, he found that alcohol was a coping strategy for him. And so then socially, growing up in a family, he learned that drinking is something that is acceptable, that is some highly desired, and so therefore, because of his upbringing, his biology, his personality, psychology, and social and spiritual cues, those things made a difference. And so it's not as simple as just stop doing it. All right, so these substances, they literally hijack the reward system and drive this person to obtain and use the drug to where it's the same as food, water, and procreation. All right, so it's no longer a simple voluntary choice, but a maladaptive response to brain-based urges that are as powerful as food and water. Now, can you help somebody go without food and water? Probably not. If somebody was starving and they were dying of thirst, could you just say, just choose not to. Just choose not to eat. Because when you eat and when you drink water, it's not good for you. So just choose to not drink and choose not to eat. And for a little bit, they'll probably try their best to do that. I understand that eating food and drinking water is not good for me. It's negatively affecting my life and people around me. So I'm just going to choose not to eat food or to drink water. And they will try their best. And for a little while, they will be able to do it. And then that urge is going to kick in because you cannot go without food and water. And so with these drugs, it gets encoded in the brain to where it's the same as food and water, and so it's not as simple as just choosing not to. So therefore, blame is placed on them. Blame is placed on them by their peers, by their family members, by themselves. So there is a difference between shame and guilt. Guilt is, I did something that's probably not good, that's bad. Shame is, I am bad because of what I've done. And so because of this, being told, just stop doing it, just make good choices, just be strong. And so therefore they think, yeah, you're right, I'll try my best to do that. It's like food and water. And then they don't, or then they can't. And then family, friends will ridicule them, or they will ridicule themselves. And then it gets even deeper and deeper. The addiction goes even deeper and deeper. So, the Latin word for addiction means enslaved or bound to. 2 Peter 2:19, for you are a slave to whatever controls you. So foods, specifically foods that are salty and sweet, tend to be more addictive. Electronics. Have you ever gone a weekend without electronics or a few days without your phone? Have you ever, and can you do it? If you ever want to do a fun experiment to see if you're addicted to something, go a few days without it. That could be electronics, coffee. Have you ever gone a week without coffee? Can you go a week without coffee? If you go a week without coffee and you have, again, the headaches and the stomach aches, that might tell you something. I'm not trying to throw stones at people who drink coffee. I don't drink coffee. And I tell people, they're like, you don't drink coffee? I was like, yeah, that's why I'm 6'4", because I don't drink coffee. And so my kids are like, is that true, Dad? And I'm like, yeah, it's true. Don't drink coffee. So it's not true. I don't know if it's true. All right, pornography is another thing. All right, so addiction to pornography, same thing. Dopamine, reward center, reinforced, coding memories. There's many, many others. 1 Corinthians 6:12, you say I am allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. Foods, electronics. And even though I am allowed to do anything, I must not become a slave to anything. So there's nothing wrong with drinking certain things. There's nothing wrong with eating certain things. But when that becomes, you become a slave to it, that's what addiction is. Not throwing stones at you, saying that you're a terrible, horrible person. It's just, that's what addiction is. And so what else does the Bible say about addiction? Isaiah 5:11, what sorrow for those who get up early in the morning looking for a drink of alcohol and spend long evenings drinking wine to make themselves flaming drunk. Notice it emphasizes sorrows, not saying you're a terrible, horrible person, but because of these things, it leads to a lot of negative consequences naturally, and so therefore, there's a lot of sorrows that come from it. You see the difference there? Yep. So by doing certain things, then it leads to certain consequences, reactions, whatever you want to call it, and it can be sorrowful. Romans 8:12-13. Therefore, dear brothers and sisters, you have no obligation to do what your sinful nature urges you to do. For if you live by its dictates, you will die. But if through the power of the Spirit you put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, you will live. So what is the point of sin? What is sin? Sin is something that is against the will of God, right? And so if God knows that by doing certain things can lead to sorrows, then can lead to negative consequences and eventually lead to death, then he's going to probably emphasize that and say, hey, let's not do this because I love you so much that I don't want to see this consume you. You become a slave to it, and then eventually sorrows, and then even can take your life. That's why in Romans 6:12, don't you realize that you become a slave of whatever you choose to obey? You can be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living. Notice it's not throwing stones, saying terrible, horrible person. It's warning, 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 heads up, watch out, be careful. Galatians 5:19-21, when you follow the desires of our sinful nature, the results are very clear. Now there's a long list of things here. Drunkenness is one of them. All right? Quarreling, jealousy, outburst of anger, selfish ambition, all of these things, the results are clear. It results in things that are very negative. And so trying to let you know, heads up, watch out, be careful of these things. Let me tell you again, as I have before, that anyone living that sort of life will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. That's scary stuff. Scary stuff, right? So, how do you receive freedom? Pray, read your Bible, accountability partner, Christian fellowship, faith, fasting. Now, I'm going to say something that's not going to sound very Christian-like. All right, you ready? Sometimes, many times, you're going to have to, God's going to require more from you than that. That doesn't mean that God doesn't want you to be healed. It doesn't mean that he cannot heal you. It just seems that there is a different journey that you have to go on. I've seen many, many clients in my office. I've seen pastors in my office. I have seen psychiatrists and physicians in my office. And it's not as simple sometimes as just read your Bible and pray hard enough. And if you don't, then you don't have enough faith or you're a terrible Christian. It's not that simple. Sometimes that does happen, but if it doesn't, it's not always because of sin. You need to renounce sin. Or it's not that simple. Many times a journey of uncomfortable growth experience is required for transformation because it leads to sanctification. What do I mean by sanctification? It's the state of proper functioning. For example, Naaman in 2 Kings 5, he was the commander of the king's army and he got leprosy. And so he wanted to be healed of leprosy. And he said, what should I do about leprosy? How can I be healed? And someone said, well, there is a prophet that can probably heal you, and his name is Elisha. So why don't you go see this prophet and see what this man of God tells you to do? And so he went to Elisha, and Elisha came out and told him, go to the Jordan River and wash yourself 7 times, and then you'll be healed. So guess what Naaman's response was? He was furious. Why was he furious? Verse 11, but Naaman became angry and stalked out. I thought he would certainly come out to meet me. He said, I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord his God and heal me. But it didn't happen. He told him, go to the Jordan, wash yourself 7 times, and then you'll be healed. And so then he did. And so he swallowed his pride. He went to the Jordan. He washed himself 7 times, and he was healed of leprosy. Sometimes when you pray, God, please heal me of this, and it doesn't happen, a lot of times people get angry, right? God, why didn't you just wave your hand and heal me? Don't you love me? Don't you care about me? And then family will say, aren't you praying enough? Don't you have enough faith? Is there sin that you need to really renounce and talk about? But maybe there's a journey the person needs to go on. Another example, Saul. He was killing Christians. He was on his way to Damascus. And Jesus appeared to him in this blinding light and said, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And so Saul became blind for 3 days, and Jesus told him, go into the city and you'll be healed. So he was blind for 3 days, goes into a city, and then Jesus appears to Ananias and says, Ananias, I want you to go to Saul and I want you to pray for him. And Ananias said, I don't want to go pray for this guy because this is Saul. He kills Christians. I don't want to go anywhere near him. And so Ananias went to him and he prayed for Saul, and Saul was healed. Why didn't Jesus just say healed? Why didn't, with Naaman, he didn't just heal him? Why not? Because he can't? Nope, he can. Because he doesn't want to? Not necessarily. It seems that God loves you so much that he doesn't want to leave you the same, so therefore there's a journey that you need to go on. So with my kids, I have 2 kids, 2 boys that are 6 and 13, and I tell them, I say, a lot of times I'm more interested in your character than your comfort. And so why is that? Because by being uncomfortable, it forces you to do something and to grow. Jesus himself had to be tested for 40 days and 40 nights before he really started his ministry. Why would he have to go through all of this for 40 days and 40 nights? Why didn't God just say, Jesus, ready for ministry? Go. Wave his hand and go on your way in ministry. He had to go on a journey, 40 days and 40 nights being tested by the devil. And so after that, then his ministry really started to start and take off. Why is that? What's the point of that? Right? It seems that if you're always, now I'm convinced of this. Whenever I was teaching at the University of Akron and I have counselors or even clients in my office, I tell them if you're always comfortable, you're not growing. Is that true? It is true. If it's not, are you comfortable right now? Right? It takes an uncomfortable experience to get people sometimes to move or to shift or to consider things differently. And so it takes that uncomfortable experience to get that transformation. So, just to summarize, addiction, it's a combination of biological, psychological, sociological, and spiritual. Which one is it? Is it one of these or one of those? It's how much is it? The neurobiology, so it involves the reward system by releasing dopamine, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter chemical that hijacks the brain into thinking it's as necessary for survival like food and water, leading to addiction. What is addiction? In Latin, it means enslaved or bound to. The sinful nature experiences sorrow, can separate us from God, and can lead to many negative experiences. And many times it takes an uncomfortable experience of growth to get to transformation and freedom. And so here's the challenge that I have for you, is that whenever someone has undesirable behaviors, how do you interpret it? I think there's only 3 ways to interpret undesirable negative behavior. And so I'm curious which one you might tend to look through. So is the lens, when someone has addiction, you think, oh, they're just a terrible person, just a horrible, horrible person. Why does this person have anger? Because they're a horrible person, right? That's one way you can interpret and look at things. Another one is that maybe it's a result of past wounding. So if somebody has an addiction and they're going to drugs and alcohol, maybe it's because of past wounding that they've been through. And the third one is because of how they're wired. And so a combination of their biological, their psychological, and other factors. And so it could be as simple as personality, it could be other things. And so when you are looking at yourself or you're looking at somebody else who has an addiction, which lens are you looking through? Terrible person, result of wounding from the past, and also a combination of how they're wired. Okay? All right. That was 45 minutes. Was that 45 minutes? Is that it?
Yes.
All right, hoping to set the stage for answers or questions and answers. And so,
Well, first, if we could all thank Dr. Blankenship for his time putting this together. Really grateful for what you shared. I didn't appreciate the coffee part. You could have left that out. But overall, really grateful. And I'm glad you said you're 6'4", because you're way shorter on a Zoom call than in real life. So
that's true.
Way taller in real life. But yeah, really excited. So you go ahead and get the slide with the number up there. So that did kind of tee up, hopefully, kind of ping some things for you, questions for you. Also want to bring up some folks, whether you want to hear from the clinical perspective or even just somebody's experience. So we're going to have people that are in our recovery ministry. We're going to have them up here in a moment. We're going to have a panel and a Q&A. For what it's worth, that's a Google Voice number. So it is anonymous, so you don't need to worry of, if you're probably not in my cell phone anyway. But regardless, I won't know what the number is, that it will be anonymous questions. As we bring some other folks up here, I'd appreciate as you talk. I love this stuff, and this is even some of my background, kind of undergrad. You talk about how codes in the brain. As we bring somebody up here in a second, can you maybe share what does it look like to begin to uncode? What does it look like? So is it like, okay, drugs, it's the same as food. Is that forever? And so maybe talk about unwiring the brain for a moment, and then we'll go into the Q&A.
Yeah, no, good question. So the way that things get coded in the brain, it takes an experience. It's experiential. And so if I'm having an experience, then my brain will code it. If it's a significant experience and there's certainly a strong emotion paired to it, then it's definitely going to get coded into our brain. And so sometimes, talking about the journey, it takes an experience to recode or to change the way that the brain was encoded. And so specifically, if I could narrow everything down to what causes change, experiential truth. That whole, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free, that's true. And so, but it's experiential truth. And so when I have a client in my office, and we're working on coping skills and strategies, which is great. Whenever they have this transformation, it's almost always an experience. It's not as simple as, I was reading a booklet about statistics, and that's when I knew that I'm going to change, right? It's an experience.
And speaking of that, I do want to make sure, again, to reiterate, any of those slides, you talk about statistics, we'll make all those available. I memorized all the statistic and slides immediately. If it didn't do that for you, those will be available. Those packets on the way, I didn't, sorry. But those slides will be available. Why don't we go ahead and bring, your mics are over there, fellas, so you got to walk to them, though, to get them. Yeah, they don't levitate over, yeah. So why don't we kind of go ahead and grab those mics, fellas? You want to grab some stools. So Ralph and Mark are coming up to join us. So some of that, and why don't you just slide back just a little bit?
Hey, how we doing? Hot mics.
I said your names together, but why don't you individually say, so you know which one was Mark, which one was Ralph.
All right, I'm Mark Berkshire. I'm a recovered alcoholic.
And I'm Ralph Bloom, and I'm an alcoholic.
So part of it, having these guys, I mean, they're a part of our recovery ministry, but also I trust these guys to be, obviously you as well, but some of it for them is very personal. So any question that you ask, I trust these guys are going to be honest. And so that is kind of the heart of tonight. So if there is something that you have always wrestled with, wandered, whether from a clinical perspective or a personal perspective, please kind of fire away. And I trust these guys and what they bring to the table. So some of it, I think for kind of all, or at least kind of from the clinical personal, I know this is something I get a lot. So you use some of your language. I abuse alcohol, or I have a problem with alcohol, but man, to get to that dependency, get to that addiction, from your experiences, when do you see somebody crossing that? Not just, okay, I have a problem with alcohol, now I'm an addict, now I'm addicted to it, or now I'm dependent on it. I'd love to hear some of perspective, because that's the question I get most. Well, no, I have some trouble with alcohol, but kind of crossing that line. I'd love to hear your thoughts with that.
I don't mind to jump in unless you guys. All right. So anytime that someone has, let's say, anxiety is normal. The way that we know that anxiety becomes what's called a problem is when it's excessive over a long period of time. It causes negative consequences in several areas of my life. That's when I know it's a problem. And so clinically, that's what I would say. But I don't know if you guys have ever, if that would ring true for you or.
Well, when I came in, I was asked a couple questions, right? And one of them is, when I take a drink, can I control the amount I drink? Can I stop when I want? Or, when I'm not drinking, that's all I think about, right? How do I feel when I don't have that drink in me, right? Because it's more, okay, there's people that go to a party and, okay, I drank too much last night. They don't drink again for another month, right? I don't have a problem.
Right.
But, if I go and I say I'm going to have one or two, which, by the way, in my lifetime, I never had just one or two. Never. What's the point? But once I start, I was taught that I have an allergy. And once I start, the more I drink, the thirstier I get. That thirst is never quenched. So I'm continuously drinking. I can be in a blackout stage, have way more than 5 of you combined ever needed, but I'm still drinking. I'm not going to get any drunker. I'm not going to get any higher. None of that's going to happen because I have this allergy inside of me that I was taught is called a craving, that I want more and more and more and more. So that was a question for me. Can I control the amount that I drink when I have? Can I just have one or two? No. And when I'm not drinking, that is all I think about. Now, he talked about that psychological dependency. We call it an obsession, right? You mentioned caffeine because I'm still addicted to caffeine. I drink coffee, right? But I don't know about any of you guys. I'm not going to rob my grandmother for a cup of coffee. But I know a lot of people that rob their grandparents to get a fix, whether it was drugs or alcohol. So, I would look at it, it's not just an addiction, but a disease. And I Alcoholism was defined a disease in 1956, and addiction was defined as a disease in 1987. So there's levels in my experience.
That's good.
Can I answer?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, so for me, yeah, I didn't start really partying until I was a little older. And when I mean older, like in high school. And I was your typical kid. Like, I just thought I was doing what's normal, right? And then eventually the normal became not so normal. And what I mean by that is, like, I would just consume to consume to consume. And when you talk to normal people, right, like nobody in my intermediate family is addicted or has what I have. But I started hanging around what I thought was normal, right? And when I did that, the environment, and I like the last part of like what you're wired like. Like, I'm an alpha, I'm the dog, I'm the best. My ego, my pride, and my selfishness is what just runs my life. But the problem with me is there was a bunch of insecurity and fear, right? So what I found is that when I had that alcohol or those drugs in my system, it was Superman. I was bigger, badder, stronger than everybody. And then all of a sudden, it just took over my life, and I had no idea because I didn't know what the problem was. Like, what I've also learned is that it wasn't about the drinking or the drug. So if you have someone in your family that's an alcoholic or a drug addict, I will pray for them tonight. But keep in mind that that's not the problem. That's not the issue. The issue is way deeper than that. And I didn't understand it. Because if you would have saw me walking down the street, I come from a great community, a beautiful family. My mom and dad were fantastic. You never would have said that Ralph Bloom's an alcoholic, that Ralph Bloom's a drug addict. And then it just started to consume my life. Everything I did, and Mark kind of talked about it too, revolved around drinking and drugging, and I'm telling you, most of the people in my life didn't know that. And I was asked the question that you brought up too, like, why don't you stop? That's the worst question you can ask an alcoholic. Don't ask me that, that's stupid, because I don't know. Don't you love me enough? I'll share a little bit with you. I've got two older kids that don't speak to me today. All right, my daughter's 26, my son's 22. It's not because I don't want to talk to them, but it's because of decisions that I made, and I do understand that today because I didn't before. I didn't understand that everything I did revolved around taking a drink or doing some drugs. And I had multiple people that were willing to help me. I just didn't want to accept it. So when you cross that line, for me, it was when I realized I'm going to kill myself. I got to change. That was the first moment of clarity for me. I had it in my mom's house, my dad's house, up in my room, and I knew that something had to give. Something had to give.
All right. Thanks for sharing. So, for me, I'm so glad you went into all of them and just said yes, because that is my experience as well. I feel like this one goes into the predisposition a little bit. So say you have a child who has had a parent that has a long history of addiction. So what is the best way to help that child not also become an addict?
So even though there's a genetic predisposition, doesn't mean they're guaranteed to do it, but I would be careful. And so part of that would be maybe the parent telling their story of how they struggled with it and how the child can then vicariously learn through them and their mistakes or sorrows that they've experienced. That's definitely one thing that I would do. But yeah, it does not guarantee that because of that you're going to go into it. So I would just be careful.
Yeah, I like how you said it's, the genetic part isn't guaranteed. Both my parents suffered from the disease. My father died from the disease in 2011. My mother's still out there doing what she's doing. But I've got 6 siblings and none of them have the disease, right? So it doesn't automatically mean it's gonna happen. It's just, it's there. And I watched, my dad was a very violent drunk, right? And I watched him beat on my mom, my stepmom, my brothers, me, You think that would steer me away from the drink, right? No. It's my best advice, pray.
My parents weren't at all. But I decided that, I knew better and I was going to do what I wanted to do. So for me, it's education. And it's being open and honest with your family, your kids, whomever, about what addiction really is, what I think the doctor did a great job of explaining. Right? It's not about willpower. Okay? It's not. If I could have stopped, I would have stopped.
Right.
Somewhere along the line, it got to a point where I couldn't stop psychologically or physically. Period. End of story. Now, that's just my story. You don't have to believe it. I don't care. All right? But that's what happened. And I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people in recovery. That's why I love our church. This is what needs to happen. This type of stuff needs to happen because I sat here and took a picture of the statistics, and I'm probably going to go down a road I shouldn't, but I'm going to do it anyway. Everybody's so worried about the Rona. More people died from addiction during that time frame than anybody did from the Rona. But we don't want to talk about that, right? I'm from Hudson, greatest city of all time. Right? Never happened in Hudson. None of this happened in Hudson. I'd go to my buddy's house. His parents would give us money to get the hell out so we can go do what we wanted to do because they were doing what they were doing. Because nobody wanted to talk about it. Oh my gosh, my son's a drug addict and alcoholic. My daughter is doing things she shouldn't be doing. Maybe if you talked to him about it and didn't talk at him. Because I can tell you getting talked at don't work for this guy. All right? And a lot of drunks and drug addicts I've talked to too, it don't work for them. And it sucks and it's hard because you love them, right? And you don't want them to do what they're doing. So I get it. But educate them. That's what I would say.
Maybe you can back me up on this, but I've also heard too, you talk about all kind of the coding of the brain. From my understanding too, especially if you have that predisposition, the earlier the exposure, the worse it is. And so, there's certain lessons my kids can learn. I don't know that dabbling in drugs at a young age is one of those lessons, but I don't know. I've seen studies that reveal that the earlier you experience those drugs, kind of the more trouble that it results. So I don't know if you can verify that.
I want to say I had this in my slide, but I think I skipped over it.
I had your slides memorized. You could just tell me.
Well,
I will.
so it was slide 4,
what was the seventh one?
Line 2, go.
72.4%.
All right, I think for some reason I may have skipped it. All right, so
No, go ahead.
all right, so early drug abuse among youth correlates with substance abuse later. So 47% of young people use illegal drugs by the time they graduate high school. 47%. That's almost half. That's a lot. 70% of users who use illegal drugs before 13, 70% who use illegal drugs before 13 develop a substance use disorder within the next 7 years. As compared to at age 17, if they use it, then there's a 27%. So 70% if they start before 13, and then 27% if they start at age 17. So that should tell you something right there.
It does tell me something, and maybe you can tell me, is it clinically bad to chain my kids up in the basement?
No, that's an act of love.
A clinical, gosh, put that slide away. I can't read that. Again, we talk about a lot of this is understanding, but I literally just got this question, hey, somebody I love. Man, they're probably not ready to admit it, but they need help. So talk about, you talk about experiential truth, but let's dive into a little bit. Maybe they're ready to embrace that. They need help. Your experience clinically, personally, what is the best treatments? I mean, how do we best treat alcoholism or substance abuse?
I don't necessarily have to go first, but I have an answer. Doesn't mean it's the right one.
I'm going to sum it up like this for me in my experience. There's no chemical solution for a spiritual problem. You talked about an experience, right? Mm-hmm. I recovered through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it tells me in that book that I have to have a vital, which means life-saving, spiritual experience. And that's what happened for me, because I do not, Ralph talked about the willpower. I don't have the willpower, and anybody I met doesn't have the willpower to do it on their own. That's why we have to ask for help. And that's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. You know, you mentioned the death rate of men, and it's really tough for guys like us that have egos the size of Texas to go say, I can't do this, will you help me? But it's simple as that. It really is. Because then you find somebody that's been down this path before, and they found the solution, and they can show you their path. But that's the most simplest thing, but yet the hardest thing that I had to do was say, I'm a grown man and I can't do this by myself, will you help me?
Yeah, I mean, you're only as sick as your secrets, right? And so holding on to those secrets makes you sick and sick and sick. And then there's something interesting about confession that's healing, right? I mean, it's humbling, it's confession, can be very healing. So I don't know if Ralph, you got anything? I was going to, go ahead.
Yeah, my family loved me. They wanted to help me, right? Like they wanted me to stop, like way before I even thought I had a problem. But one of the problems I also had was that I didn't understand what an alcoholic or addict was. What I thought it was somebody that was laying under a bridge, drinking out of a brown paper bag, homeless, with a needle in their arm. Not some college graduate from Hudson. Not today, fam, right? So I went and sought outside help because I wasn't gonna come to some kumbaya cult called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I sure as crap wasn't gonna come learn about some, yeah, I caught myself.
Do we have a censor? Do we have
Did you catch that? Do you have a button?
We have a bleep.
Do you have a button?
So they just cut his mic? I don't know.
I caught myself. But I did. I caught myself. Did a good job.
That was good.
Yeah. There was no way I was looking for any higher power either, because I will tell you at the end of the day, for this drug addict alcoholic, and these are our stories, right? For me, it's you have to get here. Like it can come, you can get there however you want, but you've got to find that power I call Christ. And I would have never told you that either. Now I grew up a Catholic. I grew up in Catholic school. I went to Catholic high school, but I didn't want any part of that. That was my decision, right? My decision. So however you get to that spot, that's how you get there. And the last thing I'll say is, I had to get to a spot where I was done digging. No matter who said what I was doing or what it was bad and how it was. All right? I had to quit digging. I had to drop my shovel. I had a buddy, his name's Red. That's what he talked about, a spiritual malady about dropping the shovel. And he decided to pick that shovel back up and he died. All right, I've got 6 names tattooed on my arm of people who are part of my story because they're no longer with us. And that's the reality of this. That's where I know if I decided to go do what I was going to do today, what I was doing 9 years ago, there's no coming back. And people that loved me knew that too. Maybe not to how to articulate it in certain ways, but until I decided that I had enough, it didn't matter how much mom loved me. It didn't matter how much dad loved me. It didn't how much my first ex-wife loved me, how much my kids loved me, how many times the job gave me another chance. I was still going to do Ralph. And I decided to drop that shovel in 2013. That's what it takes.
You mentioned 7. I mean, we talk statistics. But I don't know, as we sit in this room, you know, those statistics are people, right? It didn't have to be in your family, but if there's just someone that you have cared for, that if there's someone you've known and cared for that has died from an addiction, can you just raise your hand?
Wow.
Those aren't statistics, right? And so, like I said, I don't know what happens out of this, but I know I don't want that. And so I know, I just felt compelled to do that. But man, I know you wanted to share some thoughts on best treatment as well for overcoming.
I mean, I would echo these guys. I mean, I like to use fun slogans, but they just stick with me. So, I mean, if you're always comfortable, you're not going to grow. And so, I mean, listen to these guys talk. I mean, when they got to the point where it's just, it's so uncomfortable, I've got to do something. And so as a family member, if you're making somebody very comfortable who's in addiction, that's called enabling, right? Yeah, don't want to do that. And so, and I'm not saying be a jerk to them, but you know, have those healthy boundaries. I love you too much to have you be comfortable. I'm more interested in your character than your comfort. And so therefore, I'm not going to reinforce these. I'm not going to allow these things. And so then it makes the other person uncomfortable. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So having those healthy boundaries while being loving and supportive, not allowing certain behaviors to continue can make things uncomfortable. And so it's a fine line.
Can I give a cheap plug? Is that okay before you go? So if you don't know how to do that, we have an awesome group that meets at our church twice a month on Saturday mornings. It's FFA. No, is that right? Yeah. FFA. A couple folks sitting in the back there do a fantastic job of running that. So if you are a family member who doesn't know what to do with somebody that you love deeply, I would also suggest that you come to that and get some support and find out how you should not enable or how you can detach lovingly.
Yeah, we'll end with a little bit of plug of that, and I want to talk about that side of it a little bit more too, because that's some of tonight. But it's funny you mentioned some of the sensory. Like I remember the day my parents kicked my sister out. And I can hear her screaming. Like she slept in my car that night because I didn't know what to do because my parents were going to kick her out and she was going to be on the street. Like that's tough, right? Like, man. But you mentioned FFA. I know I don't want to steal, Tim's story, but I know some of that is his journey finally when somebody in their life was said, I'm going to do something really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that was horribly uncomfortable, but man, that might take what's needed to make a change in their life. And so we've talked a lot about from the addict side. So say, man, I don't think I'm an addict, but there's somebody I care about. So what is the best thing, and you kind of mentioned the group, and we'll give a big plug for that at the end too, but so what is the best way to approach that addict, to bring that up? I mean, how could kind of the non-addict, if you will, what can they do to best help and approach them?
Yeah, just what a loving family member would do is I love you too much to leave you the same. And so I want to support you, I want to love you, I want to help you, but you're showing me that this is what I need to do. And so putting the responsibility on them. So if you say, hey, will you go to treatment for me? I wouldn't say that because it's not going to work. They have to go for themselves. All right? So you're showing me that I need to kick you out of the house if that's what they decide. You're showing me that I need to not answer your phone calls when you need me to pay for this and that. That's what you're showing me I need to do. And so setting those healthy boundaries, which is an act of love. It really is. And so.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most helpful things. This isn't punitive.
Right.
I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I can't help you destroy your life.
Yep.
And that's, at least for me, to make some of those hard decisions. I had to get to the point, I'm not trying to punish anybody. This is out of love. But whether, again, it's experientially or what you've done, heard.
I'm going to echo what he said, but also what I would suggest is to find one of us. Mm-hmm. There's a line that says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. That means my wife can plead with me, my kids can plead with me, my boss can plead with me, anybody can plead with me, but that emotional level is not going to do anything about it. It's got to have depth and weight, is what it tells me. And for me, it's when somebody else, this guy right here, came in and told my story, because I can identify with him. I can't identify, with somebody that doesn't do what I do, or live what I live, or think what I think. He come in and told my story, and that's when the window cracked a little bit. That's when the seed was planted, because I identified. I pass.
I don't know. My worst fear in recovery is my kids going out there and doing what I did. But what I can tell you is that there's a ton of help out there. Again, I can tell you, people tried to help me. it never worked until I wanted to help myself. I don't know. I don't know. Talk to somebody who does. Tell them about our Thursday night meeting. Love them. Hate the addict, right? Hate the alcoholic, but love the person like crazy. Unless you've experienced it. Again, I made a lot of bad decisions in my life. Some that I think about and I wish I wouldn't have made those. I can tell you today I won't make them. Not right now. I still screw up a ton. I almost swore at church at an addiction understanding meeting, and I probably swear way too much anyway. But I digress. I don't know what the right answer is. But go find somebody that does know.
One thing, if I'm hearing you guys right, particularly if that's your case, someone you love, I feel like it could be very easy to blame, what did I do wrong? And of course, gosh, every parent, there's stuff we did wrong, but to hear you guys say, that spoke to me, nobody can love me enough. So flip that coin. If there's someone you love as an addict, it doesn't mean you didn't love them enough. It doesn't have to mean that that's some great failure of yours that led them to that place. And I could just feel, I'm sure there's loads of guilt. Oh, if I would have just loved them more, if I'd have helped them more, if I'd have guided them more, I could have fixed it. And I think I'm hearing you guys right. If it's not me, I can't fix that for somebody else. Right. And therefore, I can't take responsibility, fully for somebody else's choices. Maybe I can own I made mistakes, that's fine. But I can't do that for somebody else. And I think that's got to be huge for people.
I'm going to reiterate it to one of the people that I love the most in my life.
You don't got to talk about me in front of everybody, Ralph. Stop. Yeah.
She did the best she could. She loved me all the time. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. It was because of what I decided to do. And I've tried to tell her that, and she still worries about her young boy. But I'm going to tell her now, again, that it wasn't her fault. And it's not your fault or your fault. Maybe it's Galoob's fault, but everybody except him. It's not your fault.
All right. Kind of mentioned the rock bottom, and I think this is a big thing that I've wrestled with as well. Because, man, rock bottom, in some ways, where is it? So as they put it here, can you explain the concept of rock bottom? What is it, a single event, and how does it play into someone realizing they're an addict?
You might think it's jail. You might think it's prison. You might think it's 6 DUIs, but it's not. Rock bottom is the point you finally reach that you're willing to do something about changing your life.
Okay. You want to know what the true rock bottom for me is? When I'm dead. Because that's what it would have taken. Because that's where I got. I got to a spot when I woke up that morning where I knew what I was going to go do. Because I was running out of money. I was scared. And I was either going to go shoot it in my arm, or I was going to go put my car in a tree. Those are my options. But it's crazy how God works, right? And I know we're sitting in church and everybody in here loves Jesus and we're going to sing and we're going to praise, right? I didn't love Jesus back then. Didn't know who he was. Knew who he was, but didn't know who he was. Right? That wasn't his plan. His plan was better, but I had a moment of clarity when I looked to him and said, I couldn't do this anymore. I was 35 years old living at home with my folks, and ironically enough, I'm 44 years old living back home with them. It's great. They're the best roommates anybody could have. My mom is the best cook out there. But I was going to either die or do something about it. And the only way I was able to do something about it is because of the grace of God. And Tim talked about that in the video. He was always there, always watching. And I'm going to get a little preachy on you up here at the pulpit. I don't care what it is. You don't have to be a drug addict or an alcoholic or whatever. If you're going through whatever, he's always there. You just got to look up and grab onto his hand and hold on. He'll take you where you need to go or where he wants you to go. And his plan, what I've learned over time, is way better than this egotistical, selfish, prideful dude sitting right in front of you. A hell of a lot better, even when I don't understand it. But for me, that rock bottom was death and death alone. Until I decided, until he intervened and I said, you know what, man? All right, let's roll. I'm out. Like, I can't do this anymore. Either kill me or help me recover.
Do you want to add anything to that? Or?
That was good, though. No, I mean, sometimes you don't realize Jesus is all you have until Jesus is all you've got. And when you're on rock bottom and you're laying on the floor, you're looking up. And sometimes that's the only way that you'll get there.
Yeah, I've been amazed as I've ministered to people along the way. How, Mark, you got to mention it could be anywhere. Some people, it's a hard conversation with a boss. That's enough. Some people, it is jail. Some people, and I've talked to people like, okay, are you going to have to kill somebody? Like you can choose when you're ready. If you actually, and I want to hear you share a little bit of this. This helpful to me when we talked. The title of your book that you haven't written yet. I know it was really helpful to me because you talk about, man, we push so much compassion. And so, man, you get to how it's codes in your brain, but share a little bit just because that was helpful to me, and I think it would be to other folks.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to write a book, and that's the whole reason one of the reasons I went back to get my PhD, and I haven't written a book. And so I feel like God's given me this title, and here's the title, okay? It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. So just because you went through certain things, and maybe you've chosen to do things, and then it gets hijacked, and then it's like food or water, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility, right? And so blaming people and throwing stones, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's going to separate you from them. So if you're in that position, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to do something about it. Worst thing you can do is nothing. It's the worst thing you can do.
Another question that came in. We got time for a couple more. Does Ralph's issues with shoes qualify as an addiction? Is there a program?
Yes.
It's on the phone, baby.
It is not.
It actually came in. All right, we'll keep moving.
Careful, because
My
the
shoe
shoes...
game is fire.
That's right.
Right?
Careful,
Little
though.
Yeezy 350 boost. Anybody? No?
It might be laced, so heads up.
Hey-o. Hey-o.
No,
It is. We've reached that
My
part of
dad
the evening.
decided he was going to raise his hand.
All right, maybe we do have time for a couple more, but again, this is kind of more on the side of loving the addict and, man, having really hard, difficult things. How do you balance showing unconditional love to an addict while setting healthy boundaries against unhealthy behaviors? Because, again, it is love, but how do you toe that line?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, especially if you're taking responsibility for their actions, that's a tough one. You're going to want to try to love them and do everything for them, which you think is a loving thing to do, but it's enabling them. And so it's keeping them a slave, right? And so I put the responsibility on them. You're showing me this is what I have to do. If you do this, then I'm going to do this. And if you say it, then you got to do it. And so those boundaries is what's going to make them uncomfortable. So if you're comfortable, or if you're not comfortable giving boundaries, then what a good opportunity for you to be uncomfortable then. Right? Then maybe you'll grow with them. That'd be okay.
I mean, I would say the same thing, though. Seek support, right? Because he plugged the families facing addiction on Saturday. I'm going to plug Al-Anon, because you'll find out that there's a lot of Al-Anon alcohol that coincide, right? And one of the things that the sponsor taught us is called detach with love, right? You've got to detach from them lovingly, but it's just like, trying to stop drinking by ourselves. We can't do it. Seek support to help you do that, because it's tough, and it's the willpower there is good. It's really tough. What's stronger than the emotion of love, right? So I would definitely, in that situation as well, I would seek help and support.
All right, maybe time for one more before we wrap up. So I've heard addiction is a symptom of a deeper problem. I think, Ralph, you mentioned that. We've kind of hit on that a little bit. can Dr. Blankenship talk a little bit about how to find the underlying reasons and symptoms that typically cause the addiction of any kind?
Yeah, that's an easy one, that's a tough one. If somebody has this underlying trauma, and my definition of trauma is a wound, I mean, that could be anything. So if you have this wound in your past and you're treating just the addiction, it's not going to work. If you're treating just the wound but not the addiction, it's going to be difficult also. And so you got to do a little bit of both, sometimes one before the other, or sometimes the same. So how do you find the wound? Is that what they're asking?
That's what I heard.
Man,
yeah.
It's hard because as a clinician, I say, well, first you go into the access the emotional brain by asking projective type questions, and then, I mean,
And that wasn't a slide. That wasn't a slide.
Having someone who can ask the tough questions, whether that's a family member, a friend, someone else who has been through recovery and they have come out on the other side, whether that's a clinician. Yeah, it's not a simple answer as go wash in the river for 7 times and then you'll be good, right? And so
Is that the Cuyahoga, any river?
It's got to be the Cuyahoga, yeah.
You're gonna make a bunch of money. You figure that out, homie.
That's true, yes, yeah. So, it's there for a reason, and the way that you know that it's there is because it's, even though you don't want to do it, you try not to do it, and you know you shouldn't do it, but you do it anyways, like it's on autopilot, that's when you know that there's something there that it's unconscious, it's in the emotional brain, and you're going to need some assistance on that because most everybody cannot just will themselves to do it. That's probably not the best answer. I wish I could give you like a specific answer, but having someone to ask the tough questions.
I mean, fellas, anything you want to add of kind of helping your journey to get to some of those deeper things?
Well, like I said earlier, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is what did it for me, and that's what brought me to this church, and it brought me to Christ. But in the process of those 12 steps, what I will tell you is it did not teach me how not to drink. What it did is it found the causes and conditions of why I drank, and it treated the causes and conditions.
Yeah, mental health's no joke. I didn't know what that was until I started to get sober. And a lot of it was just things that I had no idea existed in my mind, like anxiety and insecurities and full of fear. Again, because I walk around like, I'm again the alpha, like I'm the life of the party. Here I come, like everybody follow me, right? Like, so I had to start addressing my mental health, and by doing that, I found some crotchety old dudes, really, really old, that I met in Alcoholics Anonymous. That loved me long enough until I could start loving myself again. And they were able to hold me accountable. They were able to show me what it looked like to be in recovery, so that I can start to address those deeper wounds that I really didn't know existed. And again, a lot of it for me was just insecurity, anxiety, being a failure. And I'm still working on that. I go talk to Doc Serban. I got a really great friend who works with you too, who I can call and ask for anything. And then again, I've got a lot of really great people in my life and a supporting family and all that fun stuff too. Like, I'm pretty sure they like me a lot more sober than they liked me when I was out there doing my thing, so.
It is a journey though. I mean, it is a journey. It really is. I mean, it's not as simple as, wave your hand type thing. I mean, it is a journey. And so if you're not willing to go on a journey, then you're not serious enough.
I know that was said, do something, I forget kind of where it came up, and I know, man, whether it be finding a good counselor, I mean, obviously for us, one of you, if you can maybe tell them a good meeting that maybe meets on Thursdays, maybe here, if you can just plug that for a hot minute.
Let me think.
6:30.
Redemption Recovery, straight out of Compton. Redemption Recovery, Thursday night, 6:30 p.m. It's so juicy. We love it. A few years ago, they asked us to start the meeting, and it's Alcoholics Anonymous based, but what our heart behind it, what the church's heart behind it, the folks that started it was, man, if you just need any type of help and you want some people to love on you, show up. Again, porn, food, drugs, alcohol, name it. you don't have any friends, whatever. Like, that's why I love this place, man. We want you if you're busted up and broken. And we just decided on a Thursday night at 6:30 to get a bunch of drunks down there who actually figured out how to stay sober and recover, to start loving on some people. And I took a picture on Thursday, and I was just in awe of what he is doing at that meeting. And when I mean he, I definitely don't mean this guy. I mean the baddest dude that's ever walked the planet, Jesus Christ. Like, he is just, there were 50 people in there, just wanting to help each other and loving on each other. So if you know somebody or you want to show up at 6:30, come on down.
Yeah, so if we talked about that, man, I don't know, maybe I am. I beg of you, if it's a problem, go. It is an open meeting, you already said that. So I was just there a couple weeks ago, and part of that, man, it wasn't, I wasn't there as a personal addict, but I love you. And I love that meeting, so you are welcome. If you are wrestling, if you're unsure, go. If you are wrestling through, and you kind of, Ralph plugged it already, there's someone you love that is struggling. We have families facing addiction. So these cards are at the welcome kiosk, so you can grab one. The people at the kiosk are people that serve and are a part of that ministry. So we have very few groups, and this is one of them, because it's unbelievably difficult. You talk about some of those hard decisions to try to encourage, to love an addict. I mean, what was the word you used? Lovingly detach. Does that make sense? That's not even a real thing. I don't know.
It's real. It's real.
That sounds impossible to me. AKA, that's why we have a group. So please, it drives us crazy as we offer that ministry, because we know there are people drowning. Like, people that you love are on that road to dying and are struggling for help, and to get them to show up. So, man, please, if you're not ready to show up, go grab one of these cards. Pretend, I'm talking for a friend. This doesn't apply to me. I don't care. Even the next meeting, it's funny, in God's sovereignty, they meet second and fourth Saturdays here in the Bridge. The next one, we have a conference. It's in the Stowe Library. So if you're not even ready to come to a church for a group, it's at the Stowe Library. You can go this fourth Sunday and pretend you're looking for a book, and then just check the group out. So please, I mean it. I know there should be more people in this group, and more people that want to be in this group that are afraid to take that step. If anything comes out of that, to just take a step, whether that going to a Thursday meeting here as you're wrestling through an addiction, or trying to love on somebody, come to a Saturday. So do something, and maybe it's going to, find a counselor. I mean, we want to see movement. We want to see people experience freedom. You inspired me with all your talk of, you put the mic up to your face like you want to talk.
Yeah, one thing you said is, if you're sitting there thinking, and it took me a while to figure this out, like he said, if you're struggling with, I don't know if I have a problem or not, and I don't know if I should really, you should probably show up on a Thursday. And it's not a bad thing, right? The hardest thing I ever did was get sober, but the best thing I ever did was get sober, right? Because I wasn't able to find that relationship with Jesus for me. But if you're struggling with that and you're like, yeah, maybe I'm on the fence, just come off the fence and come hang out with us on Thursday.
Yeah. So, as I said, you inspired me with all your uncomfortable talk. I'm going to try to make all of us a little uncomfortable as we close. So, I loved going on Thursday, and it was uncomfortable for me, but I love just everybody holding hands at the end. So you're going to hold hands with someone you don't know, because that's how we're going to close, because part of that, it's uncomfortable. But one of the questions was, what happens if people don't get help? And so I've kneeled next to my sister as she has died. And so if anything we can do to stop that from one less hand going up, by God, I want to do it. And so I don't know. I don't know what the next step is. I don't know who you need to talk to. Do something. Show up Saturday. Show up Thursday. If we can have one less hand go up, then it's worth it. And so if that means getting uncomfortable, if that means holding somebody's hand you don't know, we're going to do that. So in light of that, and just that sign of unity, I want you guys are on the hook too. You're going to hold hands, us four dudes up here. So I'm serious. Grab somebody's hand, and it doesn't count if you know that person. You need to grab somebody's hand that
So can we go AA style and circle it up? Can we circle
Circle
everybody
it up!
All right.
All right, big circle. No, one big circle, people. One big circle. We can do this. I yell, I'm so sorry.
Don't be a square and get in a circle.
All right, I don't know if we're going to complete or not, but you got to hold somebody's hand.
Cut across the middle.
This ended up being way more complex than I thought, but we're going to make this happen. You got to get in the circle.
It's almost there.
All right, spread it out so we can get it. There we go.
It's almost there. All right.
Dang. Yes and amen. All right. I'm so glad you're here. I don't know why you're here. I don't know if it's you or someone you love. I have a mic, so you got to put your arm around me. All right? But we're going to pray because it said, it's not just chemical, it's spiritual. So let's bow our heads together. Father, I'm so excited right now. God, in some ways, my heart's broken. God, just seeing, God, how much pain that has come from this. And so, Father, I thank you for this time. I thank you for truth that was exposed. I thank you for the lessons that were learned. But God, I pray, God, that we don't just sit where knowledge puffs up. Father God, that's freedom that was spoken about from those passages, that it would be experienced. Father, in our own life. And God, it is true of all of us. God, whether it be a phone, Father, whether it's sugar, caffeine, or whether it's an opioid, Father, we are all enslaved to sin. And God, right now in this unified circle, Father, we admit, God, we can't do it. But God, in the midst of, God, my heart being broken, I have great hope. God, because I know that you can bring freedom. I know, God, that you can break the bonds of some of these things. And as Dr. Blankenship said, man, it may be a journey. It may take a long time, but I've seen it. Whether it be the two men on stage or all the people already in the audience, Father, that have experienced freedom from sin, freedom from addiction. Father, I know it is possible. So, Father, I pray that people would take a step forward, that they would do something, but ultimately we acknowledge that it is you, God, that breaks those chains, that gives strength, God, that carries us when we fall. And so, God, I pray that you would bring that freedom in all of our lives and for the loved ones represented in this room. And we pray all that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Lord, I really mean it. Go ahead and make your way. You can clap if you want. Grab the slides and the cards at the Welcome Center. Thanks for coming.